Hi, I'm Anna in the Growing Chefs Ontario classroom kitchen, and for this December's monthly kids cooking class, I'm making citrus buckwheat ginger cookies. Buckwheat is a really interesting ingredient. As a chef, I love working with a variety of different flours. And buckwheat actually is technically not a flour, it's actually a seed, and it's related to rhubarb. It has a really interesting sort of earthy flavor, and it works really well with ginger in these cookies. The other awesome thing about these cookies is that they're actually dairy, egg, and gluten-free, which means they're safe for our friends that can't eat those things. Before we start this cookie recipe, we have to make our flax egg. Flax works as a binder, just like an egg would in this recipe. If you don't have flax, but you do have an egg, you could use that instead. To make our flax egg, we need to take our ground flax and mix it with some water. And we're going to leave it for about 5 to 10 minutes, just so that the flax absorbs all the liquid. This recipe starts as a classic cream method. I'm taking my coconut oil and my sugars, and I'm gonna blend them together until they're really well mixed and fluffy. It's important that our coconut oil is at room temperature because otherwise it'd be very difficult to blend up. My molasses is also going here at this time because it is considered a sugar as well. My oil and sugars are nicely creamed together, and now I'm going to move on to my dry ingredients. So in a second bowl, I'm going to start by whisking together all of my dry ingredients. So that is my buckwheat flour. It's my selection of spices, my baking soda, and then I'm also using potato starch. And the potato starch is just going to help lighten the taste of the buckwheat a little bit. If you are not trying to avoid gluten, you could also substitute flour. I'm going to whisk them all together to incorporate well. Back to my wet ingredients. My flax egg is looking nice and gelatinous, so that can go into my wet ingredients. And then I'm also going to add about a tablespoon of clementine juice. If you don't have clementines, oranges work great. And your clementines might have seeds in them, so just make sure you're using your palm to catch those seeds. We're going to whisk it together one more time. Now we're ready to combine both our wet and our dry ingredients. To mix my ingredients well, I'm using the back of my spoon to really push down on the side of the bowl. It's almost at the point where I'm going to use my hands to help me mix all this flour together. If your dough is feeling a little bit dry, that's okay. You can add the other half of your clementine. So once your cookie comes together like this in your bowl, you're ready to chill it. I'm going to chill this in the fridge for at least 30 minutes before I take it out and start rolling. And that'll just make it easier for me to roll and will allow the flour to hydrate. So once you put this in the fridge, make sure it's well wrapped and you set your oven to 350 degrees. My dough has been sitting in the fridge for about 20 minutes and my oven has been preheating for that long as well. Now when working with gluten-free doughs, it can be a little bit difficult to roll them out sometimes, and that's where parchment paper is a great thing to have. So I'm going to do that today. I also have a little bit of extra buckwheat flour to just sort of powder my surface if I need it. And also because the dough has been chilling, it might be a little bit crumbly because the coconut oil has solidified, but that's okay. You can mash it back together and roll it out and mash it back together again until it's reached that perfect temperature. When I'm rolling, I'm trying to apply even pressure as I roll outwards. I'm looking to roll my dough to about 1/4 inch thick. It's just a rough guide, so don't worry if you don't get that thin. And now I'm going to use my cookie cutter. You can use whatever kind of cookie cutter you like. If you don't even have cookie cutters, you can also use the rim of a glass. Works great. Because this dough is fairly delicate, I'm going to remove my cut out cookies by taking out the dough around it. And normally when you're using flour to make cookies, you have to be careful about the number of times you re-roll that dough because you create too much gluten and you get a tough cookie. But because there's no gluten in this dough, we can re-roll it as many times as we want. On my parchment lined baking sheet, I'm gonna start placing my cookies. And you do have to be a little bit gentle with these. These cookies don't spread very much, so you can place them fairly close together. All right, these cookies are ready for the oven. They're gonna go in for only about 7 minutes. It feels like a really short period of time, but they're so thin, they cook up really quickly. You want to take them out when they just start to get a little bit brown on the edges, but no more, because the longer they cook, the crispier they'll become, and they'll still cook a little bit after we take them out of the oven. My cookies just came out of the oven, and you can see just slight browning. It's a little difficult to see with the buckwheat, but I have a little bit of cracking, and when I press them, they're still a little soft. So they're perfect. I want to get them off this hot tray as quickly as possible because I don't want them to keep cooking. It's important that we allow these cookies to cool before we put the icing on, or else it would just run off completely, and we want it to set. So while my cookies are cooling, I can make the glaze. And for the glaze, I'm using icing sugar. And I'm gonna echo the spices that I used in the cookies themselves. So I have a little bit of ginger and cinnamon. And then for any glaze, you can typically use water or milk, but I'm going to use clementine. And I'm gonna use a little bit of the zest as well. So for the zest, all we want on the outside of our clementine is just the very outer layer. I don't want the white pith underneath because it's a little bit bitter. So very carefully, using a microplane or a zester or a rasp, you can gently zest some of the clementine. And now we're going to use our clementine juice. So remember using your hand to catch all those seeds. And we'll start with 2 halves because you can always add more liquid, but you can't take that liquid out. So I've mixed in all of my clementine juice, but it's still a little bit stiff. That's okay. I'm going to use a little bit of water or non-dairy milk to help just spread it out just a little bit more. I don't want my icing to be at a pouring consistency. I want it just loose enough that it moves around the cookie without falling off. This is the consistency that I'm looking for, where if you pick it up with a spoon, it kind of slides off and clumps. It's not coming off as a steady stream, and that means it won't spread too much when I put it on my cookie. After your cookies have cooled for at least 10 minutes, you're ready to ice. So when you are icing, just put maybe a little dollop in the center. And from there, the icing will start to move out to the edges, and you can give it a little bit of help if it doesn't quite get there on its own. These cookies look great. Before you store them, make sure you allow them to sit 5 to 10 minutes to allow the icing to harden. If you have any leftover icing, make sure you wrap it well in saran wrap so you can use it again, or put a little bit extra on those cookies. I love these cookies because they have a really earthy flavor, which goes really well with the ginger, and they're still soft without being too crunchy. And I know that I can serve them to almost anyone without issue. If you're new to the flavor of buckwheat, try giving it at least 5 bites and see how the taste changes as you eat it. Trying new foods is just like jumping into a cold pool or the lake. The first time you jump into that water, it's so cold, but you don't jump out and never swim again. You keep swimming and allow your body to get used to the water. And it's the exact same thing when we're trying new flavors. So I hope you enjoy this cookie and try something new.